Okay, so good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us to kick off the series of discussion on the UN celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration. As many of you know, this is a key global policy document on gender equality adopted in 1995 by 189 member states at the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing. So I'm Professor Joy Zhang. I'll be chairing today's event, and I'll be wearing two hats today. One as the director of the Center for Global Science and Epistemic Justice at the University of Kent in England. And Kent is a pioneer in women's study in the UK, and we're the first institution to introduce the course on women's study in the UK back in the 1970s. And today we're very proud to continue that tradition. I'm very delighted to co-host this event with three colleagues of mine in the US, and they are Rosemary Barbaret, the International Sociological Association's representative to the UN, and Dawn Beckner Thomas, the World Society of Victimology's representative to the UN, and Sheetal Ranjan, former chair of the Division of Feminist Criminology for the American Society of Criminology. And now I'd like to put on my other hat as a special issue and book editor for the International Sociological Association. And I'm also very pleased to announce that this is the first in a series of discussion on this topic. The next one will take place during the UN Commission on the Status of Women meeting in March 2025. And we've also commissioned Rosemary, Dawn, and Sheetal to co-edit a special issue on the global reflection of the Beijing Declaration. And this special issue will be published in Current Sociology in 2026. Now, before I introduce our very special guest, Madame Xingjuan Wang today, my co-host and I would like to express our gratitude to three individuals who made today's event possible. First, we'd like to thank Mr. Hailong Lian, a dedicated volunteer at the Beijing Maple Women's Psychological Counseling Center. And you will see Mr. Lian helping Xingjuan with the technical aspect of the Zoom today. And second, we'd like to thank Mrs. Xingjuan Wang, a distinguished attorney who has contributed to the preparation of the 1995 World Conference and facilitate our connection with Xingjuan. And finally, a special thanks to our translator, Cindy Sun, who has assisted with the translation for numerous Kent events on epistemic justice. But having her today here is especially meaningful because her grandmother was also a participant in the 1995 conference. But of course, we're truly, truly honored to have Madame Xingjuan Wang with us today. And Xingjuan is already 95 years old, and she had a long and impactful career. She began her career in media, but shifted her focus to women's empowerment. After retiring in 1988, she founded the Women's Research Institute under China's Academy of Management Science to address the social challenges faced by women. And in 1992, she led the establishment of China's first women's hotline. In 1995, Xingjuan and her colleagues organized an NGO forum on women. This is the event that shaped the Beijing Declaration as we know it. And in 1996, the hotline evolved to become the Beijing Maple Women's Psychological Counseling Center. And her organization has been a true trailblazer in the fight against sexual harassment and domestic violence, and advocates for both critical social and legal reforms. And in what follows, my co-host will ask 6 sets of interview questions. So there will be small questions involved within this 6 major themes. We'll post these questions to Xingjuan first, and then we'll have a collective
It's wonderful
Q&A
to be here, and we thank you very much for organizing this seminal webinar.
I'll hand over
Xingjuan,
the mic to
you are
my
mother's age,
Rosemary,
and we have a lot to learn from you. We're very honored to have you with us here
Thank
today.
you, Joy. Can you hear me?
I'll start the first set of questions.
It's wonderful to be here, and we thank you very much for organizing this
seminal
Fourth
webinar.
World Conference.
Xingjuan, you are my mother's
Chinese
age,
women.
and we have a lot to learn from you. We're very honored to have you with us here today.
The fourth World
I'll start the
Conference
first set
on
of
Women
questions by asking
actually has
Xingjuan,
given
what
birth
was
to
the
the Beijing
significance of the
Declaration and the
Fourth
platform
World
for
Conference on
action.
Women for Chinese women?
It became the blueprint for Chinese government to improve women's status and empower women, putting women's movement on the fast track. Gender equality was established as the fundamental national policy of China, and the State Council formed the Working Committee on Women and Children. And since then, 4 national programs for women's development have been issued, each outlining the new target for women's development and incorporating evaluation mechanisms. China has also built a comprehensive legal framework protecting women's rights, including more than 100 laws and regulations. China has also been listed by WHO as one of the 10 high-performing countries in maternal and child health, and has effectively eliminated gender gaps in compulsory education. Women now constitute over 40% of total employed population. The government has taken various measures to promote women's holistic development, fostering both shared contribution and shared benefit.
Thank you. And could you tell us how life in China for women and girls?
All right, thank you to your questions. The 4th World Conference on Women profoundly impacted Chinese women. The conference called for seeing the world through women's eyes and speaking to the world with women's voices and changing the world through women's actions. This has ignited a sense of agency and collective consciousness among Chinese women in the pursuit of gender equality. A key manifestation of this was the rise of grassroots women's organizations from bottom to the top, which is independently formed by ordinary women outside of the established structure. Previously, we only have one single entity, but now it has become a collective force. It took their place on the historical stage of women's movement. It also becomes a vital new force for gender equality. Even 20 to 30 years later, the conference influence remains strong and vital. Its spirit has shaped the thought, the lives, and the trajectories of generations of women who have each found their own ways to promote and embody the principles. And here, I would like to talk about 2 stories. The first story is a story of a professor at Central China Normal University. During the anniversary of the 1995 conference, she explained how the 1995 conference shaped her value, her career choice, and her life. She said that she transformed from being unaware of gender issues to a staunch feminist advocate. She edited 2 gender studies textbooks. She pioneered courses on women's studies and women's social work. She also engaged in social work practice with vulnerable populations. And over her 2 busy decades, she progressed from a young teacher to a mid-career professional. And during this period, she witnessed significant advancement in gender equality in China. This is also 2 decades of her contributions and achievement. She experienced deconstructions, reconstructions, and growth. The second story is in relation to a woman born in the 1980s. During the 1995 conference, she was only 12 years old. She was aware of the conference, but it felt very distant. And her mother was a feminist, but she never considered she would take it as a career path herself. When it was in university, she experienced and encounters numerous instances of discriminations against women. By then, she deeply appreciated her mother's generation's work in challenging traditional norms and improving social systems and laws, enabling greater equality for her generation. So, as the generation of the conference ages, she felt that she had a responsibility to carry on her mother's torch. She specialized in women's history and social history in university, and she then taught gender studies at Nanjing Normal University's Jilin Women's College after completing her doctorate degree. She now considers herself as a second-gen feminist, and she experienced the joy of passing on the torch. And in recent years, the Hong Kong i.e. Maple Center has consistently attracted female university student volunteers. They told me that she decided to join after hearing the story of us.
Thank you. What is your experience from the conference, Xingjuan?
Right. The Hong Kong Center for Women's Psychological Counseling Services, originally named as Women's Research Institute of China Academy of Management
What
Science.
Is your
It
experience
was established
from the
in
conference, Xingjuan?
1988. We worked with some educated women. We established the center to help the vulnerable women, to help them to reclaim their position in society, and to establish a platform for their self-education. In September 1992, we launched China's first women's hotline. We have been providing psychological counseling and support to vulnerable women, alleviating their emotional distress, fostering their sense of agency, and helping them to realize their self-worth. And we were fortunate to fully participate in the 4th World Conference on Women. And hosting this conference in China was a momentous occasion for Chinese women. We actively sought opportunities to be involved.
Usually, United Nations conference has two parts. One is the main meeting, another part are the NGO activities. Summarizing the opinions of NGOs to improve the conference resolutions apply to both the EU Economic and Social Council and the NGO Foreign Committee, and both applications were approved. As the first NGOs approved by the NGOs granted consultative status by the UN, we were able to attend government meetings and observe, offer recommendations, and organize a forum at the NGO forum. Hence, we organized a forum, which is titled Women's Groups and Social Assistance, focused on the vulnerable women identified through our hotline, including victims of domestic violence and sexual harassment, single mothers, and sex workers. The forum explored strategies for providing social assistance to these groups. The forum was held on September 3rd, 1995, in a classroom at Huairou No. 1 Middle School. The forum attracted over 100 participants, far exceeding the 50-seat capacity. People filled the aisles, the back of the room, and even the areas in front of the speakers. This was an international forum. including women's advocates from US, Japan, Brazil, Finland, and other countries, resulting in a lively exchange of ideas. The forum was a resounding success, earning prizes from the NGO Forum Committee and a coverage from the Xinhua News Agency, which published an article titled Giving Love to Vulnerable Women. We also attended government meetings as observers and submitted our first recommendation to the conference, urging the government to strengthen social assistance for vulnerable groups of women.
And now may I ask, what did you and your colleagues gain from participating in the conference?
The conference, the greatest gift,
and now may I ask, what did
the
you
social
and your
gender
colleagues
theory.
gain from
This was
participating
the
in the
key we
conference?
have been searching on and on to unlock women's potential and awaken their sense of agency. The Women's Hotline was initiated in 1998. We were using Rogers' person-centered therapy as a guidance, which emphasized unconditional positive regard, empathy, and understanding. While this approach yielded positive results, with many callers finding solace and ending their calls on a more hopeful note. They might be crying when they call and smiling when they hang up. However, there were some callers who were unsatisfied, particularly those facing desperate situations. They sought concrete guidance and solutions. However, the non-directive nature of the counseling led them feeling unsupported, with no constructive opinions. Specifically, in the case of domestic violence, often dismissed by the mainstream society as simple marital disputes or quarrels, there's no right and wrong, actually reflected the oppression and control in the relationship. But when the counselors were adopting the value-neutral stance, they were actually reinforcing the prevailing social norms and the patriarchal structures. In that way, they won't be able to provide necessary validation and support to the survivors. Instead, they're more like blaming the victim. Furthermore, during the counseling, we were neglecting the social context and attributing domestic violence solely to individual psychological issues, and again led to victim blaming and further compounding their suffering, bringing secondary injuries. And this kind of counseling was clearly inadequate for serving the woman's needs. At that time, we did not have any contact with the feminist counseling theory. And again, we're the first organizations to use counseling to help the woman. There were no one we can learn from in China. So I created a new word called Women Aware and instructed our counselors to adopt a pro-woman perspective, advocating for women's rights and offering constructive, practical advice and to empower them and help them navigate their difficulties and challenges. Later, we adopted the concept of woman-centered from Hong Kong. And so at that time, we understood that there was a concept called woman concept. And it wasn't until the Fourth World Conference on Women that we encountered gender theory, providing us with theoretical framework and practical tools to help vulnerable women break free from traditional constraints and cultivate a sense of social agency. The gender theory offered us a fresh perspective, addressing a long-standing question of how women became oppressed. It's not because of the biological differences, but it was because of the social structure and their supporting cultural norms. And this understanding enabled our counselors to identify the root causes of the woman's oppression, of the woman's situation of being oppressed, so they can target their interventions effectively and challenge traditional belief at the fundamental level. Consequently, we revised the theoretical foundation of our hotline to integrate gender theory with person-centered theory. We provide comprehensive training on gender theory to all of our counselors, enhancing the effectiveness of our services so they can better serve the woman. To this day, gender theory already became the cornerstones of Hong Kong Center's work, woven into every program we offered to support and assist women.
Thank you, and I note the eminently sociological perspective and unique contribution of gender theory to your work. Any reflections on its broader impact?
Indeed.
Thank you, and I note
the
the
Beijing
eminently
Declaration and
sociological
Platform of
perspective
Action,
and
adopted
unique
at the
contribution of gender
1995 Fourth
theory
World Conference on
to your
Women,
work.
have become the strategic
Any reflections on its broader impact?
target and policy framework for promoting gender equality and protecting women's rights globally, accelerating the global women's movement. 143 countries have enacted legislation enshrining gender equality, equally guaranteeing women's participation in political and economic life, women's access to education, freedom of marriage, and career choice has now widely recognized as societal norms. This is the impact in the world. And in terms of the situation in China, the conference not only spurred government efforts to advance gender equality, but also empowered Chinese women to engage with the world, going outside of China to communicate with women all around the world and come onto the stage of the global women's movement. And the Hong Kong Center, riding on the momentum of the conference, 90 individuals visited 25 countries and regions, and we talked to the scholars, NGOs, we had communications and corporations, and in the 5th year anniversary, 10 years anniversary, 15th year anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, we formed a group and went to the United Nations and to tell the story of Hong Kong to the world. And Hong Kong's development also attracted the attention of global female. And there are more than 700 people from more than 24 countries and regions came and visited Hong Kong to talk about what we did. And they also help us to organize lectures for our volunteers to talk about the latest theory, technology about counseling and social work. So we jointly develop and improve our capabilities. International exchanges broadened our perspectives, allowing us to adapt and implement advanced concepts and methodologies from the global women's movement. And as a result, some of the Hong Kong's innovative public service brand was world-leading. We were both creative and forward-thinking.
Thank you. And now moving on to our next block of questions about the Beijing Platform for Action itself. What is the most important aspect of the Beijing Platform for Action for you?
I believe that the most
Thank you.
important
And now
aspect
moving on
is
to our
a
next block of
clear
questions
declaration:
about the
women's
Beijing
rights
Platform for
are
Action
human
itself.
rights,
What is the
and that
most
achieving
important
gender
aspect
equality and
of the
women's
Beijing Platform
empowerment
for Action
is
for
their
you?
fundamental right. These two documents provide the strategic objectives and frameworks for action to advance and protect women's rights globally. And their effective implementation will significantly enhance women's agency and secure greater rights and opportunities.
And to ask you, if the Beijing Platform for Action were to be drafted today, how would it be different or remain the same? And what research is still needed to better inform its implementation?
In
And to ask
2020,
you, if the
on
Beijing
the
Platform for
25th
Action were to be
anniversary
drafted
of the
today,
Fourth
how
World
would it be
Conference
different
on Women,
or remain the
the head
same?
of UN
And what
Women
research is still
emphasized
needed to
that
better
the
inform its
enduring relevance
implementation?
of the Beijing Declaration. He noted that the growing power and influence in mobilizing collective action. Yet, after 25 years, no country was come too close to fully realize its commitments. This ongoing importance on the 12 critical areas of concern, aiming at achieving the human rights of women and girls, cannot be overestimated.
President Xi Jinping of China has highlighted in a recent speech that, as Secretary General Greta stated, the progress made in gender equality over the past decades is at risk of reversal. While China has already made significant strides in many areas of gender equality, however, we must recognize that we too have not fully achieved the goals of the 1995 conference. We need to remain vigilant and conduct in-depth research and analysis to identify areas where progress needs to be consolidated and enhanced, areas where progress has been slowed, and areas facing potential setbacks. We need to combat the pandemic and promote economic and social recovery. And in this progress, we must pay special attention to the specific needs of women and implement the Beijing's Declaration and Platform for Action. This underscores the continued relevance of Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in advancing gender equality. The current challenge is not drafting new declarations, but accelerating the implementation of these existing framework. Achieving gender equality and women's full development is a long-term historical progress, which requires sustained and substantial effort.
Thank you for these wonderful reflections. I'll now pass the torch to Dawn Bickner-Thomas for further questions for you.
Thank you. Next, we move into a segment on challenges in addressing
Thank you for these
violence against
wonderful
women.
reflections. I'll now pass
In your
the
area of
torch to Dawn
expertise, how
Bickner-Thomas
has the
for further
situation for
questions for you.
victims and survivors
Thank you.
of domestic violence
Next, we
and
move
sexual
into
assault
a segment
changed
on
in
challenges
China
in
since
addressing violence against
1995?
women.
In your area of
Last
expertise,
year,
how has the
a
situation
new
for
media outlet
victims
published
and
an article
survivors
titled
of domestic
From a
violence and
to a
sexual
Law.
assault changed in China
Their
since
hotline fighting
1995?
domestic violence, which documented the work of Women's Hotline and fellow women's rights advocates in combating domestic violence and promoting the enactment of anti-domestic violence law. Domestic violence is a borrowed term. In China, this phenomenon was long-term referred to as couples quarreling, implying no right or wrong. Before the Women's Hotline launched in 1992, I visited shelters in the United States, where I first encountered the term domestic violence, I also witnessed the devastating impact on survivors. On the second day of the hotline's operations, we received a call from a woman experiencing abuse, and I immediately recognized it was domestic violence. So Chinese women also experienced domestic violence. Coincidentally, that same day marked the implementation of China's first law on the protection of the rights and interests of women. Upon reviewing the law, I discovered that it lacked provisions addressing domestic violence. So it prompted us to initiate research and study on this issue, providing social assistance to survivors, and collaborate with Women's Federation and other women's groups to advocate for legislation against domestic violence. And we have been pursuing for 24 years, from advocating for revision to the marriage law and the law on protection of right and interests of women, to include provisions against domestic violence and sexual harassment. We also push for the enactment of the anti-domestic violence law. Hongfu submitted to National People's Congress and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference and the State Council. In total, we submitted 7 proposals and recommendations. And finally, in 2016, the anti-domestic violence law was passed, and the long-awaited protection orders became available. This article features 6 women, including researchers, social workers, lawyers, and women's rights activists, spanning 3 generations, me, the oldest, at 94 years old, and the average age of the group is 75 years old. So these women have dedicated their lives to combating domestic violence, spending 20 years, 2 decades of my life, to help this process and witnessing the transformative changes. I feel immensely proud.
Thank you for that. Can you speak now to what work still needs to be done?
The enactment of the anti-domestic violence law is a milestone.
Thank you for
However,
that.
psychological violence,
now
economical
to
controls, and
what
marital
work still
rape
needs to
are
be
still
done?
not yet explicitly defined as domestic violence, so further work is required to address these gaps and strengthen the law.
Thank you for your response. Now I will ask about youth engagement and feminist movements. First, why should youth in China and around the world, especially students, care about the Beijing platform? Thank you for your response. Now I will ask about youth engagement and
The
feminist
past 30
movements.
years,
First,
the 2
why should youth in
document
China and
of the
around
Fourth
the
World
world,
Conference
especially
has
students,
propelled the rapid
care
development
about
of the
the
women's
Beijing
movement
platform for
worldwide?
action?
However, the goals set forth at the conference remained unfulfilled. Disparity in women's development persists. Inequality in right, opportunities, and resources allocations between men and women continue. Discrimination and violence against women remain prevalent. Achieving gender equality is still a long-term endeavor. It requires sustained effort of generations of women. Promoting these 2 documents among younger generation of women is crucial. And to our pleasure, we can see vibrant groups of young women active in universities and the nonprofit sector, ensuring intergenerational transmission of the pursuit of gender equality and driving the advancement of women's causes.
Thank you. What suggestions do you have for developing sustainable and effective work for women?
I hope to encourage Chinese women's study
Thank you.
scholars and activists.
What suggestions do you
to
have for
adopt
developing
a
sustainable
more
and effective
inclusive and
work for
open
women?
attitude toward Western feminist theories and experiences. Western feminism emerged from tireless struggles of women's fighting for equal right, developing a framework centered on gender theory. So, to fully understand the root of gender equality, this is very important. The two document of the Fourth World Conference on Women has established gender mainstreaming as a global strategy for promoting gender equality. So we study Western feminist theories and experience can help us to broaden our perspectives, and it allows us to draw valuable insight and advance both women's study and activism. I have personally experienced this. And I also learned about feminist psychological counseling theory and realized that for so many years of our theories and methodologies explorations at the Women's Hotline, we later discovered that it already existed in the Western sphere, in Western feminist psychology, because it's mature and comprehensive in its discipline. Had I learned this earlier, I could have avoided many detours. So based on these realizations and with the support of the board of directors, I collaborated with experts to edit and publish the book Feminism and Psychological Counseling in 2018, commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Hongfeng Center. This book provides a concise overview of the historical development of Western feminist psychology counseling and introduces its gender-based therapeutic techniques and clinical experiences. And also, at this book, I have also done summary of our work. I consider this book as a valuable asset of the Hongfeng Center, a legacy for future generations to inherit and further develop.
Thank you so much. We have much inspiration from you and many lessons moving forward in our work. Now I will turn things over to our colleague Shital Ranjan, who will talk a bit more about the future. Thank you so much. We have much inspiration from you
Dawn.
and
Appreciate
many
it. And thank you,
lessons
Rosemary. Thank you,
moving
Joy, also
forward
for
in our
organizing
work.
this. This
Now
is
I
truly
will turn
momentous.
things over
Thank you
to
so much,
our
everyone,
colleague
for all the work
Shital
that you've done
Ranjan, who will
so
talk a bit
far.
more about
We
the
wouldn't be here
future.
without you,
Shital?
and we wouldn't be at this moment in time.
Thank you, Dawn.
I'm just
Appreciate it. And thank you,
thinking
Rosemary.
that
Thank
I
you,
want to
Joy,
pick
also
on
for
your
organizing
wisdom
this.
and speak
This
about
is
the future
truly
of
momentous.
feminist
Thank
advocacy
you
in
so much,
China
Xingjuan,
and
for all the
beyond.
work that you've done
How do you see the feminist
far. We
future
wouldn't be
of
here
feminist
without
advocacy
you,
evolving in
and we
China
wouldn't be at this
specifically?
moment in time. So I'm just thinking that
Building
I
a
want to pick
world
on your wisdom
free
and
from
speak about the
discrimination
future of
against
feminist
women,
advocacy in China and
building
beyond.
a world
How do you see the
achieving
feminist
gender equality and
future of feminist
empowering women
advocacy evolving in
are
China
shared goals of
specifically?
women worldwide. Despite our differences in social systems, nationalities, and trajectories of our women's movement across country, strengthening international cooperation and exchanges will definitely benefit the advancement of women's causes both in China and the world at large. I hope to see greater integration of Chinese women into global women's movement, fostering stronger international collaborations, building bridges for mutual learning and understanding between different cultures, and creating a dynamic and interactive landscape for both cultural exchange is very good.
Thank you. So, are there areas of movements you believe of a promising potential for progress? What role do international feminist movements or global solidarity play in supporting women's rights within China? Thank you. So, are there areas of
The
movements
NGO
you believe
Forum
offer
at the
promising potential for
1995
progress?
Fourth World
What
Conference
role do
on Women
international feminist
showcased the
movements or
power
global
of women's
solidarity
NGO
play in
to
supporting
Chinese
women's
women
rights within
and
China?
spurred
95
the emergence of numerous women social organizations in China. These organizations have played a vital role in raising women's awareness of their agency and protecting their rights. Social organizations are essential for serving society and women. I hope to see more women's social organizations in China, particularly at the community level, to play a greater role in combating discrimination against women and empowering them. International cooperation and exchange between Chinese and foreign women will contribute to the mutual development and progress.
Well, thank you so much. Now let's just look forward for a minute. What do you see as the ongoing utility and relevance of the Beijing Platform for Action in today's world?
The two
Well, thank you so much. Now let's just
programmatic
look
documents
forward for a
adopted at
minute.
the
What do you
Fourth World
see as the
Conference on
ongoing
Women
utility and
establish
relevance
clear
of
goals
the
for the women's
Beijing Platform for
advancement.
Action in today's world?
While these goals have not yet fully realized, they continue to provide important guidance for the future development of the global women's movement. Building a world of equality, development, and peace remain the shared aspiration of pursuit of women worldwide. Chinese women should strengthen their cooperation with women globally to accelerate the implementation of these two frameworks and further advance women's causes both in China and around the world.
Thank you so much.
促进全球妇女事业和中国妇女有更大的发展。
Thank you so much.
好的，非常感谢。
Excellent. I think that's the end of our interview. I hope it gives everyone an overview of what the Beijing Declaration has been, how it has evolved and affect lives in China and beyond. So we still have 10 minutes left, which is a perfect timing for us to ask questions. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. You can also type into the chat box if you do not wish to be recorded. I'll use the chair prerogative to ask Xingjuan one question. Xingjuan, you mentioned the phrase, the concept you established, 妇女意识. Could you tell us a little bit of how you have promoted this concept within the Chinese society? Have you encountered any resistance? Did people think, for example, was it a weird concept for them at the time? Or did people think this is a concept that's redundant? So how did you embed this concept into the actual traditional practice in China?
主要是
They thought a
传
lot
统
of things
观
were
念
destiny.
比较强。
So a
中国
lot
的
of
妇女
women
深受这个
had
传统观
very
念的
low
禁锢，
self-esteem.
所以
They
宿
thought
命
that
力
they were
很
beaten
强。我们妇
because
女热线
they
很多
are
妇女来电
destiny
话，
was
都是
set
非
so.
常的，
I
就
am
是说
born a
很
woman.
很
I
自
should be
卑，
beaten.
是
That's
吧？这样
because they
就
had
觉得
a
好像
very
妇女
weak
挨打都是自己的
agency.
命不
That is
好，
why
女人就是
from the
赶着挨
beginning
打的。
we were
这
saying
主
that
力
we need
主
to
要是
arouse
就说妇
their
女的
agency
主体意识的
because
失
in
落
the。past they have
所以为什么红
dependency.
枫
This
妇女
traditional
中心从
concept
成立
had
开始，
imprisoned the woman
就
too
一直
much.
以
The
唤起
greatest
妇女主体
resistance
意识
actually
作为它的
China's
一个
government
宗
has
旨。
been
就
promoting the
因为
development
依
of
附
women.
性
However, the
传统
women
观念
themselves,
对妇
their
女的
own
思想
awakening,
禁
their
锢
own
太
growth
严
is
重
so
了。
vital.
最大的阻
Right?
力，我觉得现在国家还在推动妇女的
In
发展。很多
2016,
时候，
the anti-domestic violence law had been implemented. However, during the past several years, the Supreme Court said that 24% of the women was suffering domestic violence. The number was so high, which means that 13%, 30 years ago, there were 20% of the women was suffering domestic violence. However, again, decades later, 20+% of women were still suffering domestic violence, but they were not there to resist, to help themselves, to fight back, because they're imprisoning themselves with this traditional concept, saying, I'm a woman, I should be beaten. So we need to arouse their agency, to make them believe they're the master of their lives. Their lives is valuable. I think that this is the most important. Let the woman awake. This is the most important word.
要实现她自我人生的价值，我们认为是最重要的。
I will raise the questions in
就是说让妇女觉醒最重要的一个工作。
Your answer had already partially responded to some question of our audience, but our audience still want to know that in reduction of domestic violence in China, other than raising women's awareness, are there any other way to reduce the domestic violence? In addition to allowing the women to waken up so they can use the weapon of the law, to use this force to protect themselves. And now the lawyers, one of their greatest difficulties are the law reinforcement, the court, the judges, the police. Those people, they have a very strong social gender conscience. A lot of domestic violence cases, the court will say the evidence you provide is insufficient to say the case is a domestic violence. So actually, that reinforce the law. Of course, we need the law, but we also need the law to be implemented. And of course, the women need to play their part. So all these three parts need to work together to protect the rights of the women. And so law reinforcement, a lot of the judges, their concept were old. They would say the government or the law should stay out of family business. They still think that way. They don't think domestic violence is a problem. They will say that the woman, if you fight, tomorrow you'll be okay. They don't think it is so vital. So there's very few recognition or the guilty cases of domestic violence because there are a lot of cases but very few convictions. That's because the judges. We have 2 questions, 6 minutes to answer them. One of them is also similar to that. As a non-Western country, the feminist movement frequently suffer a lot from both inside and outside. So it is difficult to launch a new concept in the local culture. And on the other hand, the Western culture does not fit perfectly with the local context. So someone was asking, how could we weather the pressure of those both sides and to create something that is our own, a local and really localized women feminist movement.
创造出一个属于我们的跟当地比较接地气的这样一种妇女运动。
女人都怎么推动是吧？
How do we really create a feminist movement that's integrating with the local culture instead of simply learning or borrowing from other societies. We need to be self-reliant. We need to stand up. We need to be the master of our own life. That's important. Our society is like this. And one will say you need to be a modern woman. The government will tell you, oh, you are 50% of the workforce. You need to be strong, self-reliant, need to be a part of the society. That's one concept. Another concept is the traditional old concept. It is still in place. It is still embedded in the society. And then, as you mentioned, there's the Western philosophies. So the individual consumptionism is here too. So indeed, we are not only seeing two, we're seeing three different concepts impacting our society. Some woman was very confused. How could we be the owner of our own lives? They will be impacted by all kind of concepts. Some of them, they are very self-reliant, which very independent, which is excellent. But some was heavily impacted by consumptionism and objectifies themselves. And they thought that they have to find a good husband. That's the sole value. So I think that to push forward a feminist movement, we need to encourage the women to be independent, to be self-reliant. Don't be guided by marriage, men, and relying on outside forces for their happy life. So I believe that as feminist organizations, that is what we are doing exactly. How to encourage the women to be more independent instead of relying on a society or men.
My name is Phoebe from Kenya. I work for an organization called Born Like This Kenya, dealing with the women, issues with gender-based violence, youths battling different kinds of addictions. From Kenya. And now here is my question. I work for an organization called Born Like This Kenya. Is there something you can place with on people going through gender-based violence, battling either the people going different kinds of addictions, and now here is my emotional violence or financial violence? Is there something you can that can be used place on people going through gender-based violence to the authorities, either the person is going through or is almost being attacked? And my second question is, violence, are you touching or financial violence in the forum, something that can be used on the to male, report female gender to the authorities that violence, this person is because you find or is some men being attacked in the house are and also being battered is, and sometimes are because of touching, because I can see some male keep in quiet, the forum, they don't want to air out on the whatever they are going through in this gender situation because they're afraid, because you find some men in the house trying to are also being battered, and sometimes because of societal, they keep quiet, they don't want to air out
Thank you
whatever
for
they are
your
going through in
questions.
this
Mainly
situation
what I can
because
see
they're
are women
afraid. Are
undergoing
you also
domestic violence.
trying to also bring up their issues?
I think
Thank you.
the numbers of male victims are small in terms of proportion. Over 90% of victims are females. That's what I can see. In terms of economics, social status, males still dominate, and female are still subordinate in some sense, including economics, psychological, and social violence. Those still persist. Yes, we already have domestic violence law. However, it only acknowledges physical abuse, but to what extent, right? Small cuts, small harms does not constitute as domestic violence. So to really constitute as a crime, it requires a very severe extent of harm. So now, economics and psychological abuse are still not recognized by China's law. So that is why I say we only achieve one small milestone in anti-domestic violence. It still requires a lot of effort to help us to get psychological and economic violence against women. We need to get that recognized so that we can really protect women's rights.
都应该界定为家庭暴力，才能够对妇女的权益能够实现全面的保护。
I know we're a little bit over time, but I'm very keen to get through two questions posed by attendees based in China. One is actually sent through direct message to me. So I'm going to ask a question in Chinese. 王老师，最后有两个问题，一个是国内的年轻一代想咨询您在哪里可以获得女性主义您这种女性活动的培训，就是这是第一个问题，就是哪里可以获得这方面的培训。第二个问题是
Okay, two more questions.
第二
One comes from a younger generation of feminists in China.
提到就是国内现在女性群体本身也
where they can get trainings
也有很多的断
in
层和
relation
割裂。
to
那么您
feminist
有没有什么具体的建
activism?
议，能让这些割裂的女性群体
The second
互相合作，能够
question
携手并肩吧？就你
is
有
also
对这方面
raised
有没有什么
by
建议？
Chinese audience, asking
这个中
that
国它还
the
是有很
female
多
population
渠道
in
来
China
保护妇女的
are
权益，
very
比如说
divided
司法部，它
among
这个到每
themselves
个
as
街
well.
道，
So
它
do you
都
have
那个每个
any
区都有司法
suggestions
局，
so that
司
women
法局
groups
里头
can
有
work
那个
together
就是
in
公益律
China
师，
in the same
就是说
pursuit
可以
for
这
women's
个接
rights?
受
What are your
辅助。
suggestions?
然后妇女如果遭受的家庭暴力，她可以
In
到派
China,
出所去
there
报
are still
案，
many
那么
conduits
警察
to
他必须要
get
进行
China
干预。
women's
如
protection.
果
Say, for
这个妇
example,
女这个人
under
身
the
伤害
Ministry of
安全
Justice,
也受到
they
威胁
actually
时，
have their
她可以
branches
申请
even
保
on the
护令，
streets
对吧？
level.
这
They
些就
have
和司法的
bureaus in
这
every
个
district
政府的渠道。
accepting
第三， 妇
complaint.
联也有一个渠
Second,
道，
if a
对吧？
woman
妇联
encounters
都有
domestic
权益
violence, you
部，
can report to the
每一
police
个每一
station.
区
And
中
if,
央级
upon
的
reporting the
省
crime,
级
the
的
police must
部
intervene.
市
And if
级
the
的
woman's
区级
security
的
and
都
safety
有
is
那个，
threatened,
那么
she
她
can
也可以
also
到妇联
apply for
去
protective
投
order.
诉，
These are
是
the
吧？那么
official
妇联
channels,
也
and you
需
can
要
also
给
access
给
such
予帮助。
protection through
另
the
外就是说
women's
我刚才
federations.
谈到
Women's
为什
federations
么需
also
要
have
更多的
the departments
妇女的
at
非
different
政府
levels
组
in the
织
provincial level,
的这个建
municipal
立。
level,
实际上现在因为
counties
我
level,
们
and
有
district
很
levels.
多那个
So a woman can
这
also
个社会组
file
织
for
是法
complaint
律保护中
toward
心，
the
是
women's
吧？这个
federations. They
权利
also
的
have the
法律的妇女
responsibility
的法
to
律保
act.
护中心，
And
专门对
I
家庭
mentioned
暴力的妇
that
女
we need
权
more
利受到伤害的妇
NGOs
女，
support.
用
We
用
need
民间的
NGO
力量来
because
帮助他们打官司，是吧？这个
in
来维
the
护妇女的
society,
权利，
we
是
need
吧？那么
legal
好多
protection
几个
center.
渠道
We
都要
need
这样，关键就是妇
legal
女，
support.
很多妇女觉得家丑不可外
And we
扬，
also need
是吧？她觉
centers
得我挨打了，
targeted
我说
the
出去了，
woman
觉得没有
experiencing
面子，
domestic
很多妇女是不
violence.
报
We
案
need to
的，
get
默默
legal
的忍
support
受的这样，
for these
是
women
吧？所
in
以这个
protecting
法
their
律的
legal
帮
right.
助和心理的
All
帮助
these
应该是
conduits
同
have
时
been there.
进行的。
However,
多渠
the
道的
thing
帮
is that
助，
many women
是吧？
think that
来维护
domestic
她的权利。
violence is an internal affairs.
那您
They
对
feel embarrassed in
把不同
reporting these incidents,
妇女
so
群
they
体
suffered
就是加
and
强
they
他们之
endure
间的
it
联系
in
和合作，
silence.
这方面有没
So
有
we need to
一两
provide
个
help,
简
both
短的建
legal
议？
and psychological help towards them. We need to help them in different manners in helping them to fully safeguard their rights.
反正
All right,
现在
thank you.
呢，因为这个民间的组织啊，都是
So
比较艰难，
the question is
对
that
吧？
how
所
can
以
we
这个
connect
怎么
different
样能
women's group?
够这个有
Do you
更
have
多
some
的志愿者的参与，
suggestions in this
也
regard?
是非常重要的，是吧？我们红枫就是一个这个以少数专职人员为核
At this
心，
moment,
以志愿者为主体来开展
the
活动。
civil
更多的志
organizations
愿
are
人员、妇
struggling
女参与到
themselves.
志愿者活
So
动
to your
来，
questions,
这样的话，我们这个活
how
动就
can we
会
get
有
more
更大的
participation?
发展。
How I think
所以
volunteers'
怎样来
participation is
动
very
员更多
important.
的年轻的女
So at
性，
Hongfeng
是吧？能
Center,
够这个
we
这
only
个
have
在
a
这个
small
事
number
务
of
会的
full-time
这个2个纲
employees,
领的这
while
样一个引领，
volunteers
把
are the
扩大的
core
影响，
of
是
our
吧？更多的
activism.
参与这个社会
This
性别
means
的
that
这样一
we
个
are
平等的活
more
动，
engaged,
这
and
是
it also
形
helps
成一
us
个
to
稳
develop
稳的一个群众
at a
运动
greater
的一个
scale.
洪流。 那
So
么
how do
这
you
个
mobilize
早日
young
实
women,
现
right?
性容
I
平
believe
等，
this is very
那就有
important, and
更
I
大的
also
希望。
believe that this
嗯
can be
Great,
based
and
on
I think that's
two
a
important
perfect way
documents,
to
the Beijing's
end
platform
today's
for actions,
discussion.
to get it really implemented,
And
and to
I
really
thank you
create a
everyone for
gender-based,
staying
a
with
gender
us,
equality
and I hope
activism,
this has been an
and to
illuminating experience for you. It's definitely for
achieved a
me,
mass
and we
movement
hope that we
that
can
help us to gain
have you in our
more
future
hope in the future.
discussions. And please do look out for further ISA notice for our March events and the special issue. Rose, Dawn, Shito, I don't know if you have any last words that you want to share.
其他的同事，看看其他同事有没有分享。
I would like to thank our guest for her well thought out, insightful answers that many of us found very
希望王老师
inspirational.
身体健康，
谢谢，
生活
谢
如意。
谢。
And thank the hardworking interpreters for their
我
work,
也感谢
and also to
翻译员的
Joy and my colleagues for their participation. It has really been a very moving event.